writing of history has begun. It's called the whitewashing of history, pretending that things never happened because it appears to bother the consciences of individuals who would rather forget. There are certain things that we should never forget in this world. The Holocaust, what happened in Nazi Germany, was despicable. It was horrible. It should have never occurred. And it is good and it is right to always talk about the Holocaust and to remember the Holocaust as a reminder of the atrocities that occurred against the people for no reason at all. The observance of Passover. For those of you who are students of the bibliology, you would know that Passover is in reminiscence of the fact that when Jehovah God, quote unquote, passed over his people, and they were instructed to put blood on the doorpost, so that when the angel of death came throughout the land of Egypt, the angel of death would pass them over, and we rightfully observe Passover. But there's another thing that should never be forgotten: the Black Holocaust, the Transatlantic slave trade. I'm Tyrone Bowman. This is part one of a series that I'm going to be talking about because the generation that I call Generation X, my people, they really don't want to deal with and they don't want to hear anything about the past because they're caught up in social media, they're caught up with TikTok and all the other things that they deem to be necessary. But what you don't know will hurt you. If you don't know your past, if you don't know your history and your lineage, if you don't understand who you are and where you've come from, like most people, they will get lost. So it's a reminder to let them know what our ancestors lived through, dealt with, put up with, and have gone through. So I'll be talking about the Atlantic slave trade throughout this series, and also be giving you historical background information pertaining to the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries, the human toil of slavery, the conditions of slavery on plantations before and after the abolition of the transatlantic slave trade. I'll talk about the diseases and the European competition. So these are things and how the economics of slavery fueled and built empires. And they're telling us to get over it. We're not going to get over anything. So they can whitewash history. They can pretend that woke is dead. No, woke is not dead. We are alive. And we're going to preserve our history. And we're going to talk about it. I'm not talking about any other race of people. I'm talking about my people. You know, people are wondering why. Because look at the climate of the world and everything that we're dealing with and putting up with. It's time to set the record straight with accuracy, with historical perspective. So if you want to hear this series, subscribe to Tyrone Bowman Live, because I'll be talking about it for quite some time. Now let's get down to business. So let's talk about the slave trade. And I always put my sources up as to where I garner and get my information from. The Atlantic slave trade, or transatlantic slave trade, involved the transportation by slave traders of enslaved African people to the Americas. European slave ships regularly used a triangular trade route in its middle passage. Europeans established a coastal slave trade in the 15th century, and trade to the Americas began in the 16th century, lasting through the 19th century. The vast majority of those who were transported in the transatlantic slave trade were from Central Africa and West Africa, and had been sold by West African slave traders to European slave traders. While others had been captured directly by the slave traders in coastal raids, European slave traders gathered and imprisoned the enslaved at forts on the African coast and brought them to the Americas. Some Portuguese and Europeans participated in slave raids. As the National Museum Liverpool explains, quote, European traders captured some Africans in raids along the coast, but bought most of them from local African or African European dealers. Now, I want to talk about the African kings who participated in selling their own people into to slavery. You can't put all the blame on white slave traders because they never would not have been able to get our ancestors if the kings had not allowed them to be taken and sold into slavery. Have you ever read the book called Roots by the late Alex Haley? People need to read it. It's real. And oftentimes people always want to blame white people for slavery. Well, what about the African kings who sold our ancestors to them? For what? For cloth? For stuff? For materialistic things? All of the world's natural resources come from Africa, whether people want to believe it or not. Why do you think the nations of the earth are constantly trying to engage in contractual obligations with Africa? Because that's where all the world's natural resources are, whether people like it or not. And when truth is being spoken, people get mad. They get angry. They get bitter. They get upset. Why? Because you'd rather me talk about stupid stuff on this channel? There's enough of stupidity and ignorance going on social media right now. And if that's the kind of stuff you want to participate in, be my guest. But over here, I'm going to deal with serious issues. So, quote, our African ancestors participated in this hellish, damnable system called slavery. Quote, European traders captured some Africans in raids along the coast, but brought most of them from local African or African European dealers or traders. Many European slave traders generally did not participate in slave raids because life expectancy for Europeans in sub-Saharan Africa was less than 1 year during the period of the slave trade because of malaria that was endemic in the African continent. Portuguese coastal raiders found that slave raiding was too costly and often ineffective and opted for established commercial relations. Now let me show you an advertisement, and this is real. This is not made up. This is what it says. To be sold on Thursday, the third day, a cargo of 94 prime healthy Negroes, consisting of 39 men, 15 boys, 24 women, and 16 girls, just arrived in the brigantine Dembia, Francis Barra, Mafter from Sierra Leone by David and John Dees. This is a real advertisement that they want us to forget. No, we're not going to forget it. This is how our ancestors were sold on the open market. Things, stuff that you could buy. This is real. And too many people want to just forget about who they really are. The colonial South Atlantic and Caribbean economics were particularly dependent on slave labor for the production of sugarcane and other commodities. This was viewed as crucial by those Western European states which were vying with one another to create overseas empires. The Portuguese in the 16th century were the first to transport slaves across the Atlantic. In 1526, they completed the first transatlantic slave voyage to Brazil, and other Europeans soon followed. Ship owners regarded the slaves as cargo, stuff, things, to be transported to the Americas as quickly and cheaply as possible. They are to be sold to work on coffee, tobacco, cocoa, sugar, and cotton plantations, gold and silver mines, rice fields, the construction industry, cutting timber for ships as skilled labor and as domestic servants. The first enslaved Africans sent to the English colonies were classified as indentured servants, with legal standing similar to that of contract-based workers coming from Britain and Ireland. You know, let me tell you something, ladies and gentlemen. Do you know that the slave traders had to take out insurance on their cargo, as they called it, quote unquote? They had to take out insurance on their cargo. Lords of London, check it out. Look it up for yourself. Lords of London is what insured the slave cargo for the slave traders. The reason why a lot of you all in the comment section don't like this because you don't give a damn. And you don't want to hear truth being spoken, but I really don't care. So you can write your comments. You can put your little smiley faces all up there. You know, an injustice to any people is an injustice to all people, whether you all think so or not. It's kind of ironic how people in modernized society, as long as they can have their clothes and their cars and their iPads and iPhones and the social media stuff, and as long as they can have all the modernized conveniences, they don't care about the price that others have to pay. What about the sweatshops around the country where young children are working right now to make sure you have what you need? What about people who are suffering in other parts of the world right now so that others can have a better life at the expense of what they call cheap labor? What do you think outsourcing is about? That's why there are no jobs in America, and they want to blame it on black people and lower class people. No, greedy corporations have decided to move their corporations overseas in places where they can get the goods made for cheap and pay as less money possible to the workers. That is a stipulated fact. Have you ever watched the series called The Men Who Built America? The so-called industrialists, people of their age? You should check it out sometimes. You know, living in America, having an American dream will turn into an American nightmare if you can't survive and take care of yourself. So ship owners regularly regarded the slaves as cargo to be transported to the Americas as quickly and cheaply as possible. They are to be sold to work on coffee, tobacco, cocoa, sugar, and cotton plantations, gold and silver mines, rice fields, the construction industry, cutting timber for ships as skilled labor and domestic servants. The first enslaved Africans sent to the English colonies were classified as indentured servants, with legal standing similar to that of contract-based workers coming from Britain and Ireland. However, by the middle of the 19th century, slavery had hardened as a racist caste or racial caste, with African slaves and their future offspring being legally the property of their owners, as children born to slave mothers were also slaves, partus, sequitura, ventrum. As property, the people were considered merchandise or units of labor and were sold at markets with other goods and services. Why do you think the term stock market was invented? Stock, cargo, things. Search the history of Merrill Lynch. Go back a couple centuries. And because people don't really pay attention to things, it really doesn't matter to them. Because most people will not read, they will not research, they will not study. They won't take the time to do what must be done. And what you don't know will hurt you. I remember growing up in school, the garbage and the trash they used to teach. I used to get burned up and fed up with my teachers. And that's why I started researching and studying on my own. So every time we had to write an essay or something, I always wrote about something that the teacher did not know about to expose their ignorance and their stupidity. Thinking because I'm a black man growing up in the hood that I couldn't read and write and understand and dissect the English language. Learn to study for yourself, because the systemic ism against black people, it is real around the world. Look what happened with the president from South Africa when he came to America, Cyril Ramaphosa. He was ambushed. The blatant disrespect, blaming him for quote unquote so-called white genocide. And the more you learn, the more you're going to understand. Learn your own history. Study the genealogy and lineage of your own family. Know who you are and where you come from. Don't just go to Ancestry.com. Do your own research for real. Go to the libraries. Why do you think they want the public libraries gone? Want them shut down so people can't learn. The major Atlantic slave trading nations in order of trade volume were Portugal, Britain, Spain, France, the Netherlands, the United States, and Denmark. Several had established outposts on the African coast where they purchased slaves from local African leaders. That is a stipulated fact, black people. My black brothers and sisters, don't be ignorant. If they were alive, I would lambast them as well for selling your own people for stuff. These slaves were managed by a factor. Have you ever watched the movie Shaka Zulu? These slaves were managed by a factor who was established on or near the coast to expedite the shipping of slaves to the New World. Slaves were imprisoned in trading posts known as factories while awaiting shipment. Current estimates are that about 12 million to 12.8 million Africans were shipped across the Atlantic over a span of 400 years. Really, it's more than that. Try 40 million. The number purchased by the traders were considerably higher as the passage had a high death rate. Of course, because many of the slaves opted for suicide and jumped overboard, rather than to be sold into slavery. So the number purchased by the traders were considerably higher, as the passage had a high death rate with between 1.2 and 2.4 million dying during the voyage, and millions more in seasoning camps in the Caribbean after arrival in the New World. Millions of people also died as a result of slave raids, wars, and during transport to the coast for sale to European slave traders. Near the beginning of the 19th century, various governments acted to ban the trade, although illegal smuggling still occurred. It was generally thought that the transatlantic slave trade ended in 1867, but evidence was later found of voyages until 1873. In the early 21st century, several governments issued apologies for the transatlantic slave trade. Apologies? What about reparations? I said, what about reparations? Every other group of people received reparations. An apology means nothing when you have become multi-billionaires through an industry that dehumanized. See, some of you all don't want to know how horrible slavery was. Let me break it down to you. Our women were raped, disrespected. Young girls, even before they reached the age of puberty, were molested and raped. Families were separated. Their faiths and culture and spirituality was destroyed. It was forbidden by law for slaves to read, but they used that Bible as a means to trap them into loving their enemies and tell them that's what Jesus said. Let me ask you a question. If people are to love their enemies, then why are there so many wars in the world going on right now? If the people are supposed to love their enemies, then why are people being annihilated? And why is conquest going on around the world? Those who do not remember the past are condemned to repeat it. Quote, close quote. And I'll continue this in the next video, dealing with the background of the transatlantic slave voyage. Till then, never forget, never surrender, never quit.